Hey, everybody. Welcome to part two. This is part two with Curse of Oak Island and Beyond. And again, I am joined with Alessandra Nadavari and John Edwards. Welcome.
Welcome.
Now, in this part two, we are going to start off. There were some parts that we talked about where we're going to jump into incidents of the Curse of Oak Island, which talks, obviously the name of the show, about Seven Must Die. We're going to kind of delve into that a little bit. And some other stuff that we found while John and I were researching that. But before we get to that, I want to talk about a paranormal investigation that was conducted on the island. Actually, there's been a couple. These paranormal investigations, and as you see, John had to step out there real quick because of
cover his ears.
Yeah, he's covered his ears right now. There's certain parts that, and again, I wanted to do that disclaimer. Once again, I should do that first to say that we are touching on some areas where things may not be. This is folklore. This is stories that we've heard about the island, but they may be subjects where it may conflict with people's interest or their religion or whatever. And if that's the case, then we ask you to just, move ahead a little bit if you need to go to another section that we're talking about or what have you. But we just want to cover some of what's happened on Oak Island. So hopefully you'll be able to stick around and listen with us on this. During the episode of Drilling Down with Matty Blake, they had gone over quite a few different things that we talked about already. Some of the experiences with Dave Blankenship, some of the experiences with Dan Henske, some of the experiences with a gentleman by the name of Jimmy Kaiser that was pretty traumatizing for him, and he left the island and never came back. During all of this, there's been many people that have been on the tour or have been, some of the cast and crew, or maybe even some of the production crew have experienced many things that Alessandra shared about some of the production crew coming across cold spots and, like a black mist or mass or whatever that traumatized them as well. But they went ahead and kept on doing their job regardless. Matty Blake had invited out a paranormal investigator, and this is one that I'm familiar with from being on, watching some of the ghost hunter shows and things of that nature. His name was Brian Cano, and he came out to the island and he conducted a paranormal investigation. Now I'm going to show a couple pictures. You folks know that I love my pictures. So I'm going to bring up this one here showing this is when Brian came out to the island right here. And this is him here arriving on the island. And this is Brian Cano. Now, again, he has been doing paranormal investigations for a very long time. Now, he came out to the island to do this, and he brought along his equipment with him, of course. And doing that, him and Matty went around to different areas of interest. One of which that they went to was, I think it was over at it was one of the caissons that had been put in. They went over to a caisson and they were asking some questions, and they got a voice. Now this voice, they were trying to listen to it later to find out what the voice actually said. And there was a little bit of discussion as to, different people, if it was a name or if it was just saying something about leave and get out or something like that. But it came from over by the caisson. And so they were wondering, and they also had a large, as they were doing this and they had their recording equipment, they heard a loud bang coming in. I don't remember which caisson this was, if it was H8 or which one it was at the time. And I got a picture of them also standing on top of the caisson, and I'll show this real quick as well. That's them right there. That's Matty and Brian. And Matty is exclaiming right there in that particular picture that he heard this bang, and it came from way down below the water level on the side of the caisson. And it really freaked him out because what in the world would make that? What do you think? I mean, what do you think about that, Alessandra? What would make a sound like that down there?
I think there's something down there trying to communicate.
Now, we know that they have found bones down below. Bones have come up. And again, folks, you've probably seen these pictures of the bones, and they were from, I think they were from two different people in two different parts of the country overseas. Was that not true? Do you remember that?
One was European, one was Middle Eastern.
Thank you. Yep. And do you remember the dates of when these bones were? I think it was 1600s. I think they figured out something like that. So I know that folks, we have so many researchers in our group. Probably many of you already know the dates. I'm at a loss all of a sudden, but this is a picture here of the bones that they found. Two different pieces of bone from two different people.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so and then getting a bang on the side of the caisson, and then getting an actual EVP, which is an electronic voice phenomenon. Getting an EVP that they found out there on the island when they were doing their investigation. Pretty interesting stuff. So that in itself was really interesting. And again, we'd like to get Brian Cano on at some point, because I'd love to talk to him going forward about some of the experiences that he had. That, and again, we talk about this, how there's hours and hours and hours of film done, and this as well, Alessandra, when they came out to your property there at the in New Ross. There's so many hours of film that is done, and very
Yes.
little of it makes it actually on the show. They cut it up, and a lot of it ends up on the cutting room floor.
Something that I heard from the crew a
Uh-huh.
couple of years ago. I was hanging out with them, and they told me that sometimes they hear a disembodied voice in the woods. So one of the crew is, let's say, walking through the woods and is alone, like there's nobody else around him, and he will hear his name being called, and then he looks and there's nobody there. And this happens to a crew member who was new on the island, and he hadn't really told his name to too many people. So he was curious as to who would know his name, since he wasn't announcing it anywhere. But this disembodied voice knew his name and addressed him by his first name. So that kind of freaked him out.
Wow. That would definitely, yeah, absolutely. That would freak me out too.
You don't know why your name is being called, right? So let's say there is an entity there, and it knows your name, and then says, let's say, hi John or hi Jeff, and then you look and there's nobody there, and you're wondering, why did this happen? Is it some kind of a warning? Is it an omen? It's somebody trying to get my attention, right? So there's always this open ending with these paranormal stories.
Right. Exactly. And I've had that happen with me, and I know you've experienced something like that before too. I had that happen to me once before, and it was as if somebody came up and whispered in my ear. I was alone at the time. I was down in a basement area where there was no air moving. I felt like there was breath on my neck, and I heard somebody whispering into my ear. I could not understand what they said, and it was a female. It felt female and whispered in my ear, and I felt breath on the side of my neck. And immediately you're like, okay. And then I had to gather myself, being a paranormal investigator. I had to gather myself and then start asking questions, and it was gone. The temperature had dropped during that time. Also got the little goosebumps and all that. But then the temperature changed. It warmed again, and it was gone. But I asked questions. Once I gathered myself, I started asking questions. There was nothing more. It was just that quick. But that's what Matty Blake would call making you a paranormal experiencer. You're not just a believer, or you're not an investigator. You're actually an experiencer at that point. So it does change you, and I know that you kind of experienced something like that yourself. So,
Well, and it's not necessarily up to us human beings to explain or interpret what's happening. I think some of these things happen just so that we can experience something extraordinary that will wake us up,
mhm.
make us aware of the fact that the material world is not all there is,
Yes.
and we simply have to pay attention. So I see these experiences as learning opportunities. Like, hey, I thought I had this world figured out, but now I'm not so sure. So you're forced to be more open-minded and to pay attention, to become more attuned to yourself, to your environment, because these things are very subtle. If somebody had been with you in that basement, maybe they would not have heard what you heard.
Right.
So everybody has a different level of awareness and
Absolutely.
sensitivity.
That's absolutely true. Yeah. Yeah. I've met people who are in tune with that sort of thing and can experience stuff, sometimes you see that on TV and you're like, oh, they're making it up. They're just being over dramatic. But I've actually met people who I think are more in tune, like you said, with that sort of thing, that can pick it up. It's amazing. And I have a son who talks about stuff like that as well. And I believe him. I really do believe him when he talks about that. So I think there are people that are more in tune with that, like you said. Absolutely. There's another story that is being told, and this is, again, we stepping into the realm of folklore, and this happened in the 1940s, and it was with a little girl that you've talked about. And again, this is a story that's told. We don't know, where it came from or whatever, or we don't know a lot about it, just the story that was told. And her name was Peggy Adams, and I think she was a 4-year-old. What do you do you remember the story, Alessandra?
Yes, there was a little girl named Peggy who must have been outside playing, and she saw a couple of men on the shore, and they were wearing red coats. And the way that she described them, maybe she even drew a picture for her parents later on to show them what she had seen. They looked like British soldiers from the, I don't know, maybe 1700s or 1800s, right? And the conclusion was that she must have seen ghosts. And then she found this key, and I will send you a photo of that key so that you can show it to people. It's actually on display in this little Oak Island exhibit that's inside a Chester train station. So in the town of Chester, on the south shore of Nova Scotia, there is an old train station. The train tracks are no longer there, but the building is still there, and they're using it as a little museum, and it has a very nice Oak Island exhibit. So the key is there, as well as the stone that says 1704.
Oh, the 1704 stone. Oh,
okay.
wow. That would be neat to see. I would love to see that. Yeah, so that was the story, and she was 4 years old, and her father was a caretaker of the island at the time. His name, let's see if I got this down here. His name was Jack Adams. He was the caretaker, and I guess this was around Smith's Cove, like you said. That's where she saw the men in the red coats. Now, again, this is a folklore story that may not have a whole lot. We don't know what validity it has to it, but very interesting nonetheless. And I know, John, you've had some.
Well, I live very close to Gettysburg, so this is kind of the same things I've heard from even personal friends that have been up to Gettysburg before, and they've seen, and we always call them echoes in time. Like they could see the battles happening, and it's like something opens up, and then suddenly they're being given kind of an eyewitness to history. Whether it's paranormal or not, who knows? But they're seeing it, and then suddenly it dissipates, and I'm just like, wow, they're actually watching the battle. And they said they see soldiers loading cannons, and this is around Pickett's Charge area, and I have no reason not to believe them. But I have friends that go up there on a pretty regular basis. They have a Boy Scout troop, and the whole family makes a whole weekend of it. And I've heard some pretty wild stories about, just seeing soldiers, both Confederate and Union, in those trenches and in the Pickett's Charge area, and in a place called Devil's Den, which is a kind of a rock outcropping up there where people fought hand to hand, and it's I've heard so many stories, Jeff, that there has to be something to it.
I've heard a story like this from London, England, where some work was being done to the sewage system that's underground. Apparently, there are some tunnels down there, and there were some workers working on the sewage system underground when they saw Roman soldiers marching through the tunnel, and then they walked into the wall and disappeared. And they were dumbstruck, like, what did we just see? Roman soldiers. And then they were told that many centuries ago, I guess about 2,000 years ago, when Romans were actually in England, that there was a Roman road several meters below the modern road, because cities are kind of built up, right? So they keep rising.
Yep.
So the original Roman road was several meters below ground, exactly where these workers were working on the sewage system.
Wow.
So they did see like this snapshot from ancient history when
Right.
Roman soldiers were in England marching
Wow.
through town.
That's an amazing story. Like, so, even with that story, there has to be something to being able to have these kind of flashbacks in the history, and with your soldiers and the Civil War that I was being, or my friends were being witness to, and then Jeff, the story on the island with what might have been colonials during the Revolutionary.
Mhm.
Those are kind of three different occurrences, but they all kind of have a common theme. Like, they're going about their business.
Mhm.
They're not being distracted by that. So for me, it's very much a kind of an opening into seeing history. And I did ask several people, friends of mine, about it, who are actually one of my friends is a priest. Him and his wife are both priests, and they said he explains it by being echoes in history.
Hmm.
And I was like, "That's
Right.
what you think it is?" He goes, "Yeah, I think it's echoes in history. I don't think there's anything paranormal about it. I think you're being privy to kind of a sacred view of what
Mhm.
actually happened." And that made so much sense to me when you think about it as
Yeah.
an echo in time.
Right. Yeah,
That's just
exactly. And traumatizing. I mean, it was a very emotional time, you would think too, with those folks. And the fact that there was so many different I mean, Alessandra, you and I talked about this, and John, as being a researcher,
yeah, yeah.
well, the changing of Nova Scotia from back between the French and the British, and all the different conflicts that were going on there.
Hmm.
Again, you would possibly be looking at something happening then you're privy to this piece of history, something that took place. That's a very interesting way to look at it.
We have hundreds, if not thousands, of shipwrecks along
Oh
the
yeah.
coast of Nova Scotia,
Oh,
even
yes,
around
yes, yes.
Oak Island. And I think that when people pass away suddenly without warning in a tragic event, like a shipwreck, let's say the ship um, goes down in the middle of the night, they can't even see the shore, right?
Hmm.
They don't know what's happening. So most of them drown because
Yeah.
almost nobody could swim
Hmm.
way
Right.
back when. They had no no rescue boats, no lifeboats.
Hmm.
So a lot of people died sailing to Nova
Mm.
Scotia. And I think that when that happens, when it's sudden, tragic, and there is no funeral because maybe they didn't recover their body, right?
Right.
You just have a sea grave, then maybe that spirit doesn't know that it's no longer in this reality, but in the next one. And um, it takes a while for these souls to catch up and
Hmm.
to realize, oh, I'm no longer alive. I must move on somewhere else, right? So I think that's why we have so many ghosts here in Nova Scotia. And there's actually a book called Blue Nose Ghosts. Have you heard of
Oh
either?
yeah, that's right. Yeah, you mentioned that earlier. So yeah, tell me about that.
It was written by Helen Creighton, a
Uh-huh.
folklorist, very famous folklorist in Atlantic Canada. And she would travel around Nova Scotia and other provinces too and talk to the old folks and write down their stories, legends, songs. So she was like the folklorist in Nova Scotia, and she even picked up legends about Oak Island. There's a chapter here about ghosts that guard buried treasure.
Oh really?
And
Wow.
yes, and it's chapter 3. That's where I first read about the ghosts of Oak Island, is in Helen Creighton's book,
Wow. And what was the name of it again?
Blue Nose Ghosts.
Blue Nose Ghost. Wow. Okay. Now, was
Blue
she
Nose,
what's her nationality? Do you
well,
know?
she was Nova Scotian.
Oh, was she? Okay.
Yeah. So Blue Nose is the name of a very famous fishing schooner that
Okay.
was made in Lunenburg, and it won several races. It was
Yep. I
like
remember you talking about that
the
before.
fastest fishing schooner in the world in that time. And it became a symbol of Nova Scotia. So you will see it on the 10-cent coin. We have a replica now called the Blue Nose 2. And, you can sail on it if you buy a ticket. So it's a very iconic schooner. So if you are Nova Scotian, you can call yourself a blue nose or blue noser.
Yeah, that's neat. I do remember you telling me about that once before when we had you on the show. You were talking about that. That's wow, that's really neat. Go ahead.
And you know what? Helen Creighton, when she traveled around Nova Scotia and talked to the elderly and in the villages, and she wrote down these stories, they were very religious people. They were either Catholic or Protestant. I mean, this book was published in the 1950s, but the stories she collected even earlier. So the society was, still quite religious at the time. And these people had no problem telling her about ghosts and buried treasure and forerunners and, stuff like that. So I think that we are in the 21st century more conservative about the paranormal phenomena than our ancestors used to be.
Right. I would agree with that. Yeah. And even the natives, like the first nation, and also the Native Americans of America, of United States, they have a very rich tradition in these things that they talk about. So I mean, again, it's one of those areas where it can be like we mentioned earlier when we started this, folks, talking about it. Does it bother you with that, your religion, to be able to accept something like that? That's understandable. It really is. The Bible, as we know, talks about demons and different things of that nature. So, but it becomes a matter of, a person's own belief system and what they, are willing to accept. And so, I understand that, I really do. As being a Christian myself, there's certain things that people will, tell me, and a theorist will tell me that I can't go there for whatever reason. It goes against my belief system. So we understand that. But that's really interesting that she would share those stories like that. One of the things too that we did you have anything further you wanted to express? Okay. One of the things too that I mentioned earlier in part one was that John and I were looking into the curse. Now, you've all heard about the curse of Oak Island. Of course, that's the name of the show. But, they talk about this curse that 6 have died, the 7th must die before the curse or before the treasure can be found. So John and I got digging, and we started to find out, where did this come from? And somebody had made a comment that they thought, I heard this, it came from a magazine called True Magazine, written back in the, from an article back in the 50s. So we went digging. Now, I don't think that we actually didn't find anything about the curse, did we, John?
No, not that. I think it was 57, Jeff. I think
Yeah.
that's ringing about September 57. And we found the magazine, but we didn't see anything about the curse per se in the magazine.
Now, one thing that we did find that I'm going to kind of relate back to a story of Oak Island here, and this was an interesting tidbit. And again, this is one of those things that I have to pick it up and read because I wrote this down. This was, oh boy, did I write down what magazine this was? This was from True Magazine, I believe it was. And it talks about the 3 boys going out to the island initially. Okay. Just for a moment, and I'll do my best here, folks. This says the 3 boys paddled their canoe slowly across, and then it was hard to read some of the words. I couldn't get all of them because it's a photograph of a magazine article, and I missed some of the words, but it said the 3 boys paddled their canoe slowly across the something of tiny uninhabited islands in Mahone Bay, Nova Scotia. There was a curse upon the islands. And then I missed a couple words. It says an old fisherman claimed that the islands were protected by the devil's dog.
Oh.
And woe to him that tempted the fate of this creature, that tempted fate of that awful creature, that tempted that awful creature. Now, it talked about the devil's dog. Now, this was in an article written like back in the 1957 or 54. There was a couple of them that we found.
Yeah.
Now, I didn't get the story about we didn't find anything about the curse of Oak Island, unless this, I don't know if this ties in some way. But now there's also the story that people have talked about some sort of a dog or a wolf or a dog with red eyes seen on the island. Have you heard about that one, Alessandra?
Yes, I have heard the story from Danny Henniger. He's he's local. He lives, I think, in Mahone Bay. He knows Oak Island in and out. I don't think he was featured on the Curse of Oak Island, but anybody from around here who
Knows about
follows
it,
Oak
right?
Island knows the name Danny Henniger. So I think of him as an Oak Island historian, and he tells really good stories. He's a very engaging speaker. So Danny told me about this demonic dog that sometimes appears on the island, and that it has been seen by more than one person, but I can't recall off the top of my head who it was that saw the dog. But apparently it's black and it's got glowing eyes and it shows up at night.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I heard. That many people have seen it, and it has shown up. Whatever reason they okay, what triggers it to show up? Was it just a dog that happened to run across the causeway in the middle of the night and got on the island? Who knows? Or swam across? We don't know.
But
But many people have seen it, and they talk about the glowing red eyes. And then for John and I to stumble across this article in our research was like, wait a minute. That kind of ties back to what we heard about this dog on the island, and it says the devil's dog, and woe to him that tempts that awful creature. Now, there's been other creatures that have talked about that are mystical and have red glowing eyes. What do you know about that, John?
no, there's the Mothman that has red glowing
The
eyes, and
Mothman,
there's also in the Southwest the Chupacabra, which has also
Chupacabra.
been said to have as a canine, who is supposed to be this fierce fighting dog, and if you get in a pack of them, it's sure death to you. But they also have supposedly glowing red eyes. So there is a folklore phenomena to it where you start to see these kind of repeated
Mhm.
observational folklore pieces. And when they start repeating, these stories start repeating, there has to be some sort of truth, even with embellishment to it.
Right, right.
So I think there probably was a creature. Whether the eyes were glowing or not, I don't know. Sometimes you can take pictures of creatures, and or the light hits them and they have glowing eyes just because of the
Right. Oh,
way
yeah,
the
absolutely.
light hits their retina. And so
Mhm.
to think the story, there's probably some truth to the story. I don't doubt it. And once it becomes descriptive, and you describe it, then it becomes part of the folklore. Like, oh my God, such and such told me this is navigator told me about seeing a dog with glow red. If you hit at the light at night hits the animal's retinas just right, those eyes do look red and they glow.
Yep. Oh,
So
yeah.
I think there's some truth to the story.
Yep. And I've seen that
So
myself. Go
you
ahead.
keep talking, and I'm going to go through Helen Creighton's book if she has anything about the dog.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. But yeah, you're right, because I've seen that, and that's something that's a when you live in an area where there's a lot of deer
Same
around,
phenomena.
and you're driving down the road, you watch for eye glow. That's what I watch. You're
Hmm.
looking for that eye shine. Your headlights will shine onto the eyes of an animal,
Yep.
and you can see that it reflects back at you, and you can see them move. Then you know it's an animal rather than a sign post or something else, a sign marker or something
Hmm.
like that. So we know that that is absolutely true, that eye shine does occur, and it also has to do with where the what color are the light that shines into their eyes reflects back out of their eyes. So if it's
Sure.
firelight, it might be a orangey glow or something like that. So I could see where that could be turned into a folklore story.
Or Jeff, using a very specific lantern called a bullseye lantern, which focuses the light. It was something that they used to use back in. It's a very focused light with maybe three, four, 500 luminaries,
Mhm.
and you hold up your bullseye, and it's going to illuminate the creature. And if it hits it just right, like we do with a flash on a camera,
Yep.
there's a reason there's a feature in most photo editors called red eye reduction,
Yep. Oh
because
yeah, exactly.
red eye is a phenomenon. So
It is. Yeah.
if you're in the right situation with the right phenomena, yes, you can produce that. And do I think there was a creature on the island that matched, what the navigator or whoever saw it? Yeah, I think there was some truth to it. And then over time, there's a little bit of folklore, and then
Mhm.
someone told a little story about a curse, and think about it also, Jeff. That function of that folklore or superstition or story had a second function. If you want to keep people away from the island, It's
Yes.
now cursed. And so maybe those navigators knew there was something on the island. And this is a bit of a rabbit hole, but it kept people away from the island, which, if I have something buried there or I have some kind of interest on the island, I suddenly say, hey, there's the devil's dog and you don't want to go there because it's cursed. And if, you have this huge description, of the features of the devil dog and how fierce it is. And if you're kind of fear for your life, you're not going to touch the island.
Right.
So I think
Okay,
there's a second function to it.
Yep.
so I did find a reference to the black dog with glowing eyes in Helen Creighton's book, Blue Nose Ghost. It's on page 107. The chapter is called Devils and Angels. And people have seen a dog like that in French Village, which is not far from where I am now. It's in St. Margaret's Bay. It says that it was a great big animal, larger than a dog. It was an awful ugly thing, different from animal they'd ever seen or heard of. They were scared to death. They thought it was the devil. And then something similar, where they also thought that it was a dog and they thought that it belonged to somebody, but then they decided that it was not a normal dog, but a devil. So apparently this demonic dog appears not just on Oak Island, but elsewhere on the South Shore.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And again, is that folklore? Is from taking on that story? Somebody saw something that created that. Yeah, that's a good book. I'm going to have to pick that up for myself now because I'm really curious about, because you said it contains a lot of different stories, right?
Yes, from around Nova Scotia. And some of these stories are very old. They date back to the colonial era, so the 1700s,
Wow.
1800s.
Wow. Definitely going to have to check that out. So yeah, that's certainly, and again, it goes back to the story that we were talking about Jimmy in part one, where we were talking about Jimmy Kaiser, who was traumatized by something that happened on the island. And, he said it was a creature, a very black, curly hair type creature that was restraining him on the bed and actually made him so scared that he never came back to the island again. Could it have been some sort of like this dog that we talk about? I don't know. Could it just been a wild story from a guy who, went through a very traumatic experience, rescuing or, going down there and pulling up, retrieving the bodies from the rest halls? Could be.
Or a shapeshifter, in the United States. Yeah, I was going to say, yes, the Dene tribe, aka Navajo tribe, they talk about skinwalkers, and a skinwalker is a shapeshifter, right? It's a man, but also a coyote or wolf. So.
Which is in the Native American folklore. There's all sorts of stories about shapeshifters, and whether true or not, it's still, they believe it's true, and there's still a bit of a phenomena to it. So as I always say, Jeff, it's a line of thought, and there are people that subscribe to that line of thought being real. Whether we do or not, doesn't really matter. They do, and
exactly.
if they think it's real, for them it is.
Correct. You're exactly right. All right. So we're going to get ready to wrap this up here. This one's gone about 30 minutes or so, and I just wanted to ask each of you, Alessandra, was there anything else you'd like to add before we start to wrap this up? Any other stories or anything that you may have or experiences? If you want to think about that for a minute, I'll ask the same question of John.
No experiences, Jeff, but I think for an episode in the future, we should really dig down into some of these early accounts of Oak Island and newspaper stories. And I would like to follow up on that, because when we were doing our research the other day, just some of the older accounts into the 1800s and even the 1930s and the 1950s, some of those accounts, there were differences, but there were some consistencies. There were some repeatable patterns. And you're like, okay, I've never heard that before. And we said that several times when digging into those. I've never heard that before. And so I do want to do a future show, on just newspaper articles and magazines on Oak Island. I think it's fascinating.
We're going to do that.
Okay, I do have something that I want to mention. So sometimes the strange phenomena do not affect human beings, but machines. So electronic equipment failures, lots of electronic equipment failures on Oak Island, and even vehicles. So I have heard several stories like that, and I even witnessed it myself. My husband, he did some research on Oak Island that I don't know if I can talk about. So I'll just say that it involves highly specialized, very sensitive electronic equipment. And the first generation of that equipment, it was a prototype that he and another man, an electronic engineer, built specifically for Oak Island. So this equipment was battery powered, and first they were just getting normal batteries from the store. They would insert the battery in the unit, and they were able to monitor whether the unit was on or off remotely. And there were some units that just went dead after a while, and they couldn't understand why. And Tim would go back to the island, pick up the units, and he saw that the batteries were completely drained. And he's able to measure how much energy is left inside a battery. I'm sure you know what the tool is called. I have no idea, but it's got these two little metal parts that you put them next to the battery, and then there's like a
voltmeter.
Yeah, a voltmeter. Okay.
A voltmeter. Yeah.
Or an amp meter. Yeah.
Or an amp meter. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So he was measuring them at home on the dining table, and he goes, "This is just wrong." And I'm like, "What?" I'm like, "What's wrong?" And he said, "Well, this one battery is completely drained, and this other battery has changed polarity."
What?
So, yeah.
Wow.
Whoa.
Just
That
by
is very-
being, just by being on Oak Island. So this battery got drained mostly, and it changed its polarity, and he has no idea what could have caused that.
Yeah.
Wow. And what's interesting about that story is the swamp has always been a place where magnetism is completely altered. They've taken compasses into the swamp, and the magnetism is never quite right in the swamp. So there's something there, either a high concentration of iron ore that's magnetized,
Something.
or on a ley line, or there's something there that's causing that. Alexandra, would you agree with that?
Yes, absolutely. And we don't know what is causing it, but there's probably something under the swamp that's doing that. And like you say, it could be the geology of the island, like a high content of some kind of metal in the ground that's throwing off all the equipment. But they've also had drones crash into the swamp. You know how they fly drones over the island?
I've heard that.
So they've lost a few drones because they crashed into the swamp.
Okay. Well,
yeah.
And again, what's going to cause something like that? There could be several atmospheric conditions that would cause something like that, but also
cars will just not start. Like you will have engine failure all of a sudden on Oak Island, or the big equipment, like they bring those the drillers, they bring their huge equipment, and you have seen it on screen too, right? Where hoses disconnect themselves and
and blow apart. And Dan Blankenship talked about that himself, how things, Dave mentioned that certain pieces of equipment, today, right now, this in the morning hours, they're out there working on it, and they're using this piece of equipment. They break for lunch, they come back, and now it won't start. It's completely dead, the battery's dead, or what have you. That happens. And why? What causes that?
Somehow the island will just drain energy from batteries. It can be a small battery or a big battery. Yeah. So now when my husband puts any units on the island, he gives them like really large batteries. And I told him, just make them solar powered.
Yeah, there you go. Solar power.
Cool.
Exactly. Wow. Yeah, I've had that happen in the paranormal investigations I've had, where batteries just all of a sudden it's drained. You got it completely charged. You put it in the camera or the microphone, whatever it is you're using. You see the battery indicator full. You go out there, you start going, boom, it's dead. And you're like, well, it was just full. It can't be dead, and it's completely drained. And you go to charge it, and it takes 2 hours or an hour and a half to charge it because it was completely drained. And it's like, how did that possibly happen?
I know. So if a person experiences some, sensory strangeness, that's one thing. You can doubt yourself, but you can't doubt that machine or that piece of equipment that
Right.
just lost all of its energy. Where did it go? Energy doesn't just disappear, right? Isn't that
No.
one of the laws of
That's
physics or
Einstein's theory.
thermodynamics?
Yeah, energy is neither created nor destroyed, according to Einstein.
Mhm.
So you
Right.
just
So
can't
where did
lose
it
it.
go?
It
No.
moves from one place to another.
Yeah. So how did it move from that car battery, to somewhere else?
Yep. Who was using it? Wow. Any other
Wow.
final words? That's
No,
really
that's
cool.
this has been intense. I've
Well,
loved it.
it has, and we've gone a little long here, but again, fascinating discussions, folks. And I tell you what, I mean, we could go on and on with some of the stuff that's happened around the area, not only on Oak Island, but around the area, such as this right here. And as we mentioned, John and I, as we were looking into where the curse came from, the curse of Oak Island, where that story came from, and does it have any validity at all, or was it simply made up as an advertising tool to get people interested or scared away from the island? I was also going to mention at the same time that Alessandro was talking about how the pirates would actually sacrifice somebody or kill somebody, and when they buried treasure, to say that that person's now going to guard that. Could that have been a story or something they did to scare people away, rather than saying that that person, or rather than that person actually being there and protecting it, but to scare, oh, look what we just did, now don't come around here, this guy's going to get you. So he's scaring you. Is that possible? I guess. But again, it's one of those types of things where, is it folklore? How much did it really, play into people's minds, their psyche at the time, or did it actually, develop in some way? I don't know. That's one of those big questions out there. But as John mentioned, we were digging into this whole thing about the curse, and we came up with some very interesting information. And we might have to ask Alessandra if she wants
Oh,
to come back
absolutely.
and join us on this, and we'll share some of what we found and see if she wants to dig into this a little bit herself. But I got to tell you, thank you so much, Alessandra, for joining us on this one. I knew you'd be the perfect person to come on here with John and I, because you have so many experiences yourself around your property and where you are right now. You mentioned that before, earlier when we were talking, this place there where you are, you're not, anyway, I'll leave that alone. But you said this is a haunted location, but so I know you are very susceptible to that, and it would be the perfect person to come in and join us. And John, as always, thank you, sir, for coming on and being here with me on the show. All right, folks, that's it for this edition of the Curse of Oak Island and Beyond IDK, because we still haven't come up with a name, but we got that contest out there for you folks to come up, help us come up with a name for this one. I'm just going to call this one Oak Island Paranormal for now, and we'll call it that. All right, thank you for being here again. And if you're out there on YouTube, please hit that subscribe button for us and click on that notification bell so you know as soon as we put up new content on the show. Again, thank you both very much for being here tonight.
Thank you as well.
Thank
This
you.
was a lot of fun.
All right, bye-bye, folks.